All right, welcome to the NIL Lounge. I'm your host, Andrew Miner with the NIL Report, and we're welcoming in our guest, Shehan Jeyarajah, National College Football Senior Writer for CBS Sports. Shehan, welcome on.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. We're, just a week away from college football starting up, and it's been a busy off season for everybody, and I know you especially. What's your, we're going to talk about kind of your advice that you would give to athletes when they're considering NIL and want to share your insight with what you've learned. But real quick, just wanted to get your thoughts on everything that's happened and college football conference realignment, expansion, et cetera, and how maybe NIL has kind of changed the game for forever.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot, of course. Obviously, I think that so many things changed with that 2020-21 season. Obviously, NIL coming into the picture, the transfer portal becoming revolutionized, and also, I think, the one-year transfer rule as well. All of these things happened right at the same time, in addition to also the COVID year. So it has been a mess trying to deal with rosters the past couple of years. I used to work for Dave Campbell's Texas Football, of course, and when we were putting together our preview magazine in 2021, it's like you just didn't know, even in some ways, how it was going to come together. So I don't envy those guys anymore. But I think that it's been good. It's obviously been a lot in a short amount of time, just for everybody to deal with. And I'm looking forward to hopefully things settling down a little bit as people get more comfortable.
Yeah, absolutely. And you cover college football coast to coast from national champion Georgia to Oregon State, who seems to be, being left behind in the Pac-12, dust, right? And just curious, with all the athletes that you've worked with, the schools that you've worked with, collectives, the NIL collectives you've talked to, what are kind of the most unique ways that you've seen athletes, find ways to make money in these, first 2 years of NIL?
Well, of course, there's several. Obviously, collectives are the ones that get the most attention, but there's been a lot of opportunities, not even just for football players or basketball players, but to build local relationships in their communities. Obviously, something that's come about is there are a lot of really high profile women's athletes who have gotten brand deals or national commercials and things like that. But it's even gone down to obviously people getting deals more in their community with a restaurant or with a car dealership or any of these things. So I think for me, what's been the most interesting thing is that there are so many different levels to this. This is not something that's just focused on only the top 5 players in college football. This is something that I think has impacted people at every level, and I think that that's something that's been kind of cool about it.
Yeah, is there a favorite deal that you've seen put together? It could be college football, it could be other another sport that you've seen and is like that's cool, or that's a really unique activation type thing.
Yeah, I remember back when there's a football player named DeColdest Crawford, and he was at Nebraska last year, and he ended up, obviously his name is DeColdest, he ended up doing an NIL deal with a local AC company. And so it obviously the tie-in with the name DeColdest, and obviously AC companies making things cold, and so they really played that up. I thought that they did that really well. I know he transferred to Louisiana Tech, and I believe that there's another player whose nickname is like Polar Bear or something like that. And so now he has a deal with that company at Nebraska. And so I love these things. Obviously, we saw Kool-Aid McKinstry over at Alabama. He has a deal with Kool-Aid now where he's tied in with them. So I love when they're able to kind of take people's personalities and find ways to market it, not just for the player, but also in a way that markets the brand.
Yeah, that those are definitely some good ones. Richard Reese from our alma mater, I should say, Baylor, struck a deal with Reese's last year, so that was a pretty cool one for me. You mentioned, it doesn't have to be big national brand deals that you're seeing with NIL, and that a lot of athletes in a lot of different sports are kind of growing relationships at the local level and kind of building, their social media and those business relationships. Kind of grassroots style. I think you've been really successful in your career in building up your Twitter and your social media presence as well as you've gone from different outlets and now to CBS. What advice would you give to an athlete maybe just starting off as a freshman or an underclassman in maybe not a football sport to kind of do exactly what you're talking about that you've seen, build those relationships and maybe grow a brand for themselves.
Sure. Well, I think that the biggest thing is be true to yourself. Don't try to come up with a perfect image that you think that you need to maintain. Like, embrace parts of who you are, embrace hobbies that you have, embrace parts of your personality. A great example of this is Floje Johnson over at LSU. She loves to rap, and she built a following based off of her rap career in addition to her basketball career. And that wasn't something that was fake or that she kind of made up for the cameras or anything like that. That's something that she loved to do back home, and managed to kind of leverage it in a big way too. And so for me, I think that for every athlete and for every person really is trying to figure out what is your brand and how is the best way for you to maintain that brand, right? So for me, I think that my brand as a journalist, one, I mean, obviously, I'm South Asian. I'm a Sri Lankan American son of immigrants. I think that puts me in a unique position. I'm a Texan. That certainly is very central in my coverage of not just college football, but I think of who I am as a person. I went to a smaller school, Baylor, well, obviously a smaller private school out of these group. And I think another part of it too is like I came up through Dave Campbell's Texas football. Where I was doing a lot of smaller college coverage. So I think that it gives me just like a different view of the sport. And another part of it too is that I'm an outsider to football. I didn't grow up in the football world, and I really embrace that because that means that I want to ask people questions. I want to understand in a way that's different. And so these are all parts of just who I am that I feel like are part of my brand. And so whenever I'm communicating on social media, I want to be accessible. I want people to understand whenever they read one of my articles, whenever they read one of my tweets, whenever they watch one of my videos, this is who I am. And none of it is contrived. It's all just who I am, but I'm pushing that and I'm marketing that in a central sort of way. So I think that it's very good for people to try to understand what's unique about them and what's most authentic to themselves and find ways to display it on their social media.
Yeah, authenticity is so key, and you've obviously done a great job and provide some good examples there. When NIL first came to be, Shehan, one of the biggest, I don't know, I guess fears or criticisms of it was that it's going to split the locker room in half, right? And that quarterbacks or basketball superstars are going to get paid so much more, and then it's going to fracture the team, and they're not going to play well on the field or the court. In your coverage of the past couple of years, have you seen any evidence of that where maybe a team has been split or didn't perform up to expectations, or have you seen the opposite where it's actually helped unify the team?
Yeah, so I think that to answer both sides of that question, I think that ultimately, when you go out in the world, people understand market value, right? People understand who's Johnny Manziel and who's not. I don't think that anybody in a Texas A&M locker room was like, why am I not making Johnny Manziel money? There are some things that obviously, for better or worse, are worth more market-wise than other things. So I certainly have not seen that. I don't think that it's honestly a really realistic sort of issue day to day. I mean, again, quarterbacks are probably going to get paid more than left guards, and that's just kind of the reality of the situation. Now, again, that's where I think the off-field stuff can really help you when you have personality, whenever you are able to kind of market yourself in a unique way that's tied to who you are, as opposed to just what you're doing on the field. It's easier if you're a 1,500-yard rushing running back to be able to market what you do on the field. For other people, maybe it's something else, right? Maybe it's if you're a great volleyball player, maybe it's also marketing parts of your personality or tying things in, stuff like that. But I think that, I certainly haven't seen very many examples of people having resentment with others for having different kinds of market value. I think it's kind of understood. I mean, look, I work at CBS Sports, and I don't think it's a secret that Dennis Dodd makes more than I do, right? I mean, he's been doing this for a long time, and he's earned the money that he makes. And so it's kind of works the same way. The other side of this at all, I will say, is that I do think that I have seen teams that were completely and only built on money and NIL and things like that. And I do think that you can notice when people per se uh aren't committed to the team the same way. Because, I think that the funny thing is, especially being around the sport for a while, is you hear these little things like, are they committed to football? Are they whatever, this, that, do they have chemistry? Do they get along? I mean, this stuff really matters. You can feel when a team is on the same page, and you can feel when a team is not on the same page. And so I think that I have seen examples of teams being put together uh, through primarily monetary means without sort of that common goal and purpose. And some of that I think falls on coaching staffs. They have to be the ones to bring this all together. And I think some of this falls on the players too. If you're just making a decision only based off money, and this is not a sports thing only, this is also in the real world. If you're only making a decision and money is the only factor that you're taking into account, oftentimes you're going to find yourself in a bad situation. I've turned down jobs that would pay me more money because I like a situation that I'm in, or I feel like long term this might fit my goals better and put me in a better position in 3 years, even if it's not the most money right now. So that's also something that I'd caution people is there are many other factors to take into account other than just what the biggest number is. Now, obviously, you should find and get what you're worth, but that's only one factor to take into account.
Yeah, I think a good example was, have you watched, you mentioned the Johnny Manziel doc. Have you watched the Florida documentary yet?
I haven't as yet, but I've heard a lot about it.
Yeah, it was interesting because I was watching that the other night, and they won the championship in 08, and then 09. A lot of people returned. Tim Tebow returned, and in the documentary, spoiler alert, the players were saying that they didn't really like Tim Tebow getting all the attention all the time, type thing. Not that anybody, I don't think, could control that, but they did mention that it kind of fractured their team, and ultimately was why they weren't able to repeat. Now they still had a really good year, and they just ultimately lost to Alabama. So who knows, right? But they did mention that, and I was like, that's interesting because that's the first time I've really heard of that.
No. And I think that one other part of this is you see this a lot, I think, actually specifically in teams that win titles, because when there's sort of this common goal, and this is not a college sports thing only, this exists in pro sports as well. Whenever it's easy to convince people to sacrifice for the betterment of the team once you're trying to do something that you've never done before. Once you win, then it becomes about, well, I want to win, but I want to do it my way, or I want to do it in a way that benefits me, right? So you see this all the time. I mean, it's one of the reasons that it's actually very difficult to have dynasties, even in pro sports, is because we saw 2021 Golden State Warriors are a perfect example, right? They go and win the title, and all of a sudden Jordan Poole's contract comes up and Draymond Green's contract comes up, and everybody's like, well, I deserve as much money as I can get, which they absolutely do if that's what they want. But it's harder to do that and also try to build a team culture and also try to maintain everybody with limited resources. So it becomes a factor for sure. But, I think that large scale, I would say that those dynamics work the same in college sports as they do in really any other arena of life.
Yeah, 85 Bears, good example as well.
Yeah.
I think. And then the flip side, right? Miami basketball went to the Final Four this year, and that was a lot of life wallet money to Nigel Pack and others, and they made it to the Final Four. So I guess it could work both ways. But that really interesting points that you made there. Switching gears a bit here, Shehan, you're in the media. You deal on the media side 24/7. And your main objective is to tell the story, right? That's any journalist's really main objective for the most part, is to tell and share the stories of athletes, teams, etc. How would you advise athletes to best tell and share their stories and communicate with somebody like you or somebody at ESPN to really elevate their brand, to make sure that the story they want, if they can't tell it, they can use someone like you or someone else to tell it correctly and communicate what they want told?
Sure. Well, I mean, I think one big thing that I'd mention, and I kind of gave a similar talk actually to some sports folks in the Big 12 a few weeks ago, is, the media exists to professionally tell stories, right? We have a specific platform, we have a specific skill set. I've written features and articles and stories for obviously a decade at this point. And so I think that the first part of it is understanding the role of the media, right? Because sometimes it can feel very contentious. I think that college sports especially can sometimes feel a little contentious, but this is a human based industry, and I think that that's the big thing that I'd say is find the human connection of these things. That's something I try to do as a reporter. Whenever I meet with somebody, I want to find, what is their story, where did they come from, what do we have in common, how, who can understand this. Sometimes it's worth trying to find, in some ways, a reporter to pitch a story to who has understanding of the story. I mean, one example for me, right, like, obviously I'm a Texan, so like whenever I hear of stories that involve Texans, like I have an understanding of that story that's unique versus somebody else who might be in the national media. So I think that that's one big part of it is understand who you're talking to, understand their context, and then try to help them understand exactly what you want to say as well and what your story is. So that's a big part of it. I think another part of it too is look, think about it from my perspective, right? I have 50 emails a day with people who want me to tell their story or think that their story is the one that's worth it. And so it's also about trying to communicate with those people, this is the story, this is why it's important. And also another part of it too, especially if it's like a school athletic department or something like that, is here's how we can also help make that happen. Because the worst thing for me, for example, is wanting to pitch a story and then, and the school sounds like they're on board, but then it's, well, I can't get this interview for 2.5 weeks and I can't get this interview for 4, so it's also the logistics of telling the story. How can I, here's people who would be good for you to talk to. Here's people who have background in who I am. And a big thing to note is that when you go to a media company or when you go to a journalist, you do not have control of the story. They're going to try to find everything. And sometimes that can be a great thing. They can find things that you maybe didn't even know or understand. And sometimes that can be a bad thing because obviously it can reveal stuff that maybe you didn't expect to be revealed. But I mean, that's sort of the, my work as a journalist, my greatest my greatest sort of partnership is with the truth. I want to tell the truth. I want to tell as accurate a story as possible, as correct a story as possible. And I want people to understand what the truth is at the end of it. And I think that at the end of the day, I think that that players and coaches and athletic departments and journalists can very easily be on the same page whenever we're honest and open with one another.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Capital T truth. That's what you want. What catches your eye in your inbox when you have 50 emails from athletes or athletic departments that makes you say, Shehan, like, yeah, that's what I want to write about.
Sure. Well, I think that for me, every journalist is a little bit different. Every journalist wants something a little different or is into something a little different. So for me, I love being able to tell the stories of people, right? And so, if you send me an email that's just like, well, X player signed X NIL deal, would you want to write about it? The answer is probably no. I probably don't want to write about it because, one, that's just free advertising for your NIL deal, which, like, as for me as a national journalist, probably isn't a priority. And so I think that what I would want to see from somebody making a pitch is, one, here's what we can offer you, and two, it offer you in terms of the story, not in terms of compensation or anything.
Yes,
But,
Sean's money under the table here.
No, I do not take money for stories. But I think that the other part of it is that is just to have like some sort of understanding of what the hook of the story is, right? Why is this important? Why is this a story worth telling? And again, like, my job is also to try to find those things, but when you are pitching a story like that, I mean, you want to have understanding, like, look at other stories that are written. And like, for example, if you are, a third string guard and or a third string linebacker, and you want your pitch to be about how much you've improved this offseason, well, like, that's probably not a story that a national outlet is going to tell, just realistically, right? Because, like, think about it again from our perspective. We have a very limited amount of stories and a limited amount of resource that we can tell. So, maybe that's not the right time for it. But, if it's that you're a third string linebacker and you overcame something, or, just if there's like a human story attached to it, that makes it much easier to tell that story than somebody whose story is solely built on just football merit, if that makes sense.
Yeah, the human element of it
Yeah.
that makes it jump off the page, come to life for any reader that's going to ultimately read the story. Lastly, Shehan, you kind of touched on a few of these in here, but I'll ask you, a lot of players now, you see this more maybe on the professional level than the college level, are making their own media companies, doing their own podcasts, things like that to tell their story, which is great. In your eyes, what are some differences between the pros and cons of an athlete doing that on their own versus working with someone, such as yourself or another national outlet to tell their story instead?
Sure. Well, I think that actually the Florida doc is a good example, because I think that people could kind of tell that, well, this was shaped in a way that benefited Urban Meyer and was shaped in a way that benefited Tim Tebow. And so people can tell the difference between stories that are truthful and are honest and ones that aren't. And so if you create something that's only for your own benefits, people can tell the difference, right? And so the difference with somebody like me or an outlet like CBS or any of these other national or local or even local type outlets is that they're coming from an independent perspective. When you say, "Hey, I'm awesome and I'm working hard," that's cool. When I say it, or when a local media member says it, or anybody else, it's a different type of credibility. It's a cosign. It means that we've done our research and we can really speak to what you're saying. And so, one, I think that it helps bring more credibility to your story when you're not the only one telling it, because everybody can write a story about how good a player they are. I mean, gosh, again, I've gotten so many pitches over my life of players being like, "I'm a really good player and you should write about me." And sometimes they are, sometimes they aren't. And so I think that, when you're able to ally yourself with an independent third party like a journalist, it brings more credibility to your story. And the other part of it too is that we have built-in platforms, right? When you put something on cbssports.com, when you're written about at cbssports.com, more people will read about it, and will read about it in a different way than if you create your own website and create your own thing alone. Now, again, there's tons of benefits to if you do something well to telling your own story in addition. So, for example, I've heard so many positive things about Paul George's podcast, the NBA player, because he brings on people and they have very honest and frank conversations and, really give insight into some of the stuff that's happening behind the scenes. And there's a level of comfort with talking with a player instead of a journalist or a media company. It's different. But there are also other people who have podcasts who, again, it's all about clearly trying to just promote yourself. And I think, again, people can tell the difference. It makes the content and the product worse when you aren't necessarily open the same way or honest the same way. So I think that there's advantages to both. I'd advise people to take both approaches to it, not just one or the other. But that's sort of the benefit of doing something with a journalist or media company versus without, is that I think that you just get a more full-scale telling of a story. And again, you get the cosign of people with credibility on top of that.
Yeah, no, the authenticity and truth, I think they tie together really, really nicely. And it's something I think athletes should definitely, consider and evaluate before, making their decisions in this NIL era for sure. Lastly, Shehan, we'll leave on a fun note. I know you love basketball. I'm going to transport you back in time and put you on Scott Drew's team at Baylor. What would be your dream NIL deal as the shooting guard for the Baylor Bears?
That's a good question. That's a really good question. I mean, so obviously, so I was at Baylor from 2012 to 2016. That's where Andrew and I overlapped. Obviously, we were both members of Baylor's student fan organization, the Baylor Bear Pit, back in the day. So still going strong. So, that's a really good question. I mean, I feel like a very on-brand thing for me would be to like have like a coffee shop sponsorship. Like that's what I loved at Baylor, was like getting to go to like Dichotomy and Common Grounds and do all these sort of things. So and actually Pinewood Roasters didn't exist back whenever I was on campus. I think that maybe I'd want to do an NIL deal where they provide me with a coffee subscription so that I had that year round.
Okay, I'll have to check that one out. So no, excellent insight to the world of Shehan. He definitely needs that coffee as he's pulling all-nighters to type
I got some right here.
appropriate. So well, thank you so much, Shehan, for coming on and joining us, talking about NIL and the advice you have from a media member perspective. I think it was excellent. So I'll give you a plug. Where can people follow you and read your work?
Yeah, you can follow me on Twitter at Shehan Jeyarajah. I'm actually on basically every social platform at Shehan Jeyarajah: Twitter, Blue Sky, Threads, Instagram, all of it, TikTok, I think. So you can find me at Shehan Jeyarajah on all of them. That's the benefit to having a very unique name, of course. And you can read all of my work at cbssports.com.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Shehan, and look forward to watching this season with you.
Thanks so much for having me.